We've got VS Code open. We're going to prepare to migrate to WebdriverIO in this fresh Angular project. I'm just using the Tour of Heroes tutorial from Angular's website. And I'm using Angular 14, so I've got the latest version running so you can follow along. I'm also going to use my notes because otherwise I'm going to forget what I'm doing. So feel free to, if you want to skip ahead and just jam through these steps, I'll leave this up for a second and you can kind of guide yourself through this. Otherwise, you can follow along and I might have some tips and hints along the way. First thing I like to do when I jump back into a project is do an npm install. Just make sure that all your dependencies and things are up to date. Maybe you're switching between branches, so dependencies could be off. In this case, they weren't. Everything's up to date. And I like to also start, especially when I'm doing a migration or an update or an upgrade of dependencies, anything like that, I like to make sure that we've got a clean baseline. So I'm going to run the existing end-to-end tests and make sure they all pass first before we go migrating to WebdriverIO. So we'll do an npm run e2e. That's going to run the Protractor framework, and that's what we're migrating from. So from Protractor to WebdriverIO. And these should just work. I haven't changed any code yet. Cool. As you can see, it's running through the tests. Let's just make sure it gets through all of them. Perfect. You can see it ran 22 out of 22, took 15 seconds. Excellent. So that's a good baseline. We can start from there, start making some changes to the actual project. So why not? I'm going to refer to my notes, and let's go ahead and create a new branch. Always nice to start from a new branch and start doing small incremental changes to it. Something like migrate to WebdriverIO. I think that's a good branch name. And we're going to actually have to initialize WebdriverIO. What this is going to do is install the dependencies for us and kind of get the project set up. Partially, we'll have to make some adjustments to it. So npm init WebdriverIO in the current directory. So it'll use the package.json and some other configuration files to figure out what to do. Let this do its thing. Cool. So what's really nice about using npm init WebdriverIO is that it'll kind of prompt you. It has a sort of a wizard that'll walk you through how to do a basic configuration of WebdriverIO. So we're going to go on local machine. Going to use Mocha, TypeScript, and what I like to do is kind of put everything underneath the end-to-end, the E2E directory that already exists. So we're going to go /EDE test specs ***/*.ts. And if you're not aware, like the **/*, what this is saying is recursively check the current directory and now all the subdirectories for spec files. So that's good. That's what we want. And yeah, let's go ahead and have it auto-generate some test files for us. That way we can quickly find out if our configuration is working properly. We're not going to keep these files, but it's a good starting point. And same thing, we'll go ahead and have it create some page objects for us. And similar, I'm going to use the same end-to-end directory to kind of anchor everything. These are going to be pages *//*.ts. It recommends page objects, but I like to shorten to just pages. That seems to do the trick to help people know what's in there. And I like spec. It's just a really basic reporter for when you run your tests. Console reporter. And we're not going to install any plugins. We'll just leave that alone. So just hit enter. We're going to use Chrome driver. And then the base URL, it's going to be HTTP, not a capital P, just normal, //localhost, and it's port 4200 if you're doing just a normal default install of Angular. And sure, why not? Let's go ahead and have it run npm install for us. That'll get all those new dependencies. locked into the project. Sweet. All right, so that gets us through this whole section here. I like to go ahead and do some cleanup right away. So we're going to go into the end-to-end directory, and we're going to remove Protractor conf and tsconfig. These are all related to how Protractor is configured, and we're not going to be using Protractor anymore. So we'll just go ahead and remove these. Delete them directly as well. Okay. And we'll move, so it creates a test directory, which I don't really like. I don't know why it separates it out, but we're going to move these into the end-to-end directory. And then we're going to, this is going to be a temporary change we're going to make right here. Later on, we're actually going to use an Angular schematic for WebdriverIO, and I'll go into that in a little bit. So first, let's go into package.json, and we need to change this to be end-to-end, since that's now where our configuration file lives, end-to-end, WDIO conf, so need to change that. And then we need to tell WebdriverIO to actually compile our TypeScript files for us. And I'm just going to copy, I'm not going to type all this out, I'm just going to copy it from my notes. But yeah, so it's kind of some configuration options, how TS node should be configured. And this is just saying you find the tsconfig file in this location, so the end-to-end directory. So it's going to use this one and not the root one. I think by default, WebdriverIO, the latest versions, it will auto-compile for you, so it shouldn't really need this option. But I think because it tries to, if I don't have this, I think it tries to use the project's root tsconfig, and that's not compatible with how WebdriverIO is set up. So you might end up, if you were to leave this off, you're going to get like it doesn't know what the export keyword is, things like that. Okay, so that should be good. Let's go ahead. Let's see if there's any other notes. I think, oh, okay, yeah. And we're going to go into the configuration file, and we're just going to comment this stuff out. We don't need it right now. We might not need it at all, but especially when we use the Angular schematic for WebdriverIO, we'll configure this stuff directly in the schematic. So we'll just comment this out. I just did a control/ or command/ if you're on a Mac. That does the auto commenting for all that block of code, if you're not aware. All right, so I think we're all dialed in there. So let's just go ahead and run this. And what this is going to do is it's going to run the sample code. It's not going to run the Protractor code. But this will be good enough to make sure that we've got everything wired up properly. So npm run WebdriverIO, WDIO. And this is a good sign. We've got Chrome coming up, and it ran through that sample code. So that's great. So this passed. That's looking really good. I think we're at a good state to commit some code. So like I said, I like to do incremental changes, try to group things together. So this is really kind of grouping up the preparation of migrating to WebdriverIO. So we'll write something like that down. Prepared the migration to WebdriverIO. Make sure I spelled all that right. Looks like I did. Normally, I would also recommend kind of walking through all the diffs, make sure that we're including exactly what we want. Maybe we'll do that. There's not much of a reason to kind of go through the lock file that's auto-generated, but we can take a look at some of these things. So a lot of this should just make sense since I didn't make like a lot of direct code changes. So a lot of this stuff should be pretty much expected. So yeah, like if there's a new WebdriverIO script, that's going to be running the configuration for us, pointing to the configuration, and the WebdriverIO initialization did all of these dependencies for us, so that all that stuff looks good. Removed Protractor. We modified the existing tsconfig by replacing it, so that's the configuration we need for WebdriverIO. And then we've got some new files for the various pieces of WebdriverIO. I'm probably not going to commit these last 4 since these are just, it's all sample code and I don't really want to revert that stuff. So I'm going to go and highlight these, and I should be able to right click and stage these. So stage changes. Cool, so just those, we'll keep these as is, and then I should be able to commit all of this. Perfect, and then I'll go ahead and publish that. That'll push it to the branch. I think we're good there. Let me close some of this stuff, kind of clean up my workspace a bit. Clean it up a bit. Next up, we're going to install the WebdriverIO schematic. That'll allow Angular to figure out how to use WebdriverIO when we actually run the end-to-end stage. And through the magic of editing, I've updated my notes. Again, got to refer to the notes. So first thing we need to do is actually install the schematic. So this is actually from WebdriverIO. So let's do that. Install that. Let that run. Perfect. Then we need to actually modify Angular, its configuration to use this new schematic. So we're going to replace the Protractor one with the end-to-end one. So let's go to that file. And I'm just going to copy this stuff over, and I'll describe what some of this is in just a second here. And we want to replace basically the Protractor config. So we want to replace this whole section, and we'll auto format. So this is the new builder it's going to use, which is the WebdriverIO builder, and some configuration options. This is just telling where to find WebdriverIO's configuration file. So remember, it's in IDE, and then also what TS node, what TS configuration to use, also in IDE. So that's kind of similar to how we did that little workaround in package.json. This is just kind of configuring WebdriverIO for us. And everything else we can leave alone. That's all fine. All right, so let's jump back here. And yeah, so we're going to go into our package.json. We don't need this anymore, so I'm just going to remove this whole thing. And I did a Control-D to remove that line. Depending on your key mapping, that might be set up or not. I like that. It's convenient. Just remove a whole line. All right, and what else do we have? Okay, so pretty simple. Hopefully that should have done the trick. So we'll do an npm run ede, and instead of Protractor, we should see our sample code from WebdriverIO run instead. Cool. Looks like it's working. So that kind of completes the initial prep. Getting WebdriverIO instead of Protractor running, configuring it, all of that fun stuff. Oh, you know what? Can't forget to commit. Commit, don't quit. So let's get this committed. Again, I'm gonna skip the sample files. So we just want these files, and we'll use my advice again and kind of look through, make sure that we're committing the right stuff. So yep, configuration stuff there. I don't really see anything else. Oh, I guess we removed a new line when we formatted, and that's fine, not a big deal. Can play around later with the formatter. I'm not gonna look at the log file, just want to look at the package.json. So yeah, removed WebdriverIO script and removed the comma, and also added the schematic, and it looks like it did some formatting. It added a new line this time. So yeah, definitely my formatter needs some help, but we can play around with that some other time. So that all looks good. Let's go ahead and commit these, or let's stage them first. And we'll say installed WebdriverIO schematic, if I can type. Okay, so we'll commit that stuff. Close these out. And we can probably close the configuration. We're not really using that too much anymore. So that's all good. And I think that's good for now. I think the next step is going to be actually migrating the existing Protractor code. those spec files, the test files, over to WebdriverIO, and we'll save that for another set of videos. So until next time, peace.